Okay, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us. We are here with Alanna Okun, the author of Curse of the Boyfriend Sweater and also Knit a Hat. So thank you so much, Alanna, for being here with us.
Thank you guys so much for having me.
Kyle first. Oh, real quick, we'll do a toast. I know you're not drinking because you're working, but I'm trying to get through this.
We can do a seltzer toast, yeah.
I'll cheers with my Brennivin that I'm trying to go through.
L'chaim.
It doesn't get any better. If you ever go to Iceland, buy yarn, not the booze.
That's good.
Or not the Brennivin.
The vodka's just fine.
The vodka's great. The beer's great. Coffee's amazing. Not that.
Oh my God. I would pay any amount of money to go anywhere in the world and drink the worst possible booze right now.
So, do you want to do this, Joan?
No, you go ahead, Kyle, because you're the one who first got me into this book, and it's so great.
Oh, thanks,
so,
guys.
Alanna wrote this amazing book that I found. I think I was researching knitting needles at the time, and I followed a link down a rabbit hole, and it came to this, which is a collection of essays that aren't really about crafting. They're about life and anxiety. And I think that this is the book that Michelle T. or Michael Chabon would have written if they were writing a book about crafting. These are just beautiful, beautiful essays. So lovely, in fact, so powerful that I very often had to stop and just look at a sentence again because it was so beautifully written. And I'm just gobsmacked that you wrote this book about crafting as the thing that it wraps around. And it's absolutely stunning. It's beautiful. And we're so happy to have you on here talking about it and your life and all of the things that are in it. So
thank you so much. This is really making my day here.
It's a beautiful, beautiful book.
It really, it is. It's I was telling somebody about it, and I'm like, it's about knitting, but not.
Right.
Like, it's not about knitting. And real quick, I have to ask, is that the Afghan behind you?
No, actually, fun fact. This is this blanket that I made, and it's crochet. I made it maybe 2 or 3 years ago from a Pearl Soho pattern. So it's the thickest yarn you can imagine. It's I think it's their Gentle Giant, which is and I used basically I think a size 50 crochet hook for this. It was more like wrestling. So this honestly probably took me a couple weeks to put together versus the Afghan in the book that you're referencing was one giant granny square worsted weight that took me actually years to finish. And that's at my parents' house right now. And my mom actually recently sent me a really cute picture. Her longtime best friend dog passed away last year, and it's been hard to sort of recover, but she got a new puppy, and she sent me a picture of her and the puppy curling up with the Afghan, and I was just like, hell yeah, this is what I want to see here.
I think it's going to be hard for me not to ask a bunch of inside stories about stuff that was actually in the book, but to keep it more general, Joan has had an obsession forever with this Curse of the Boyfriend sweater, and everybody we've had on the show from Iceland, she's been, do you have this thing in Iceland about the Curse of the Boyfriend sweater? And so I've heard it a lot from Joan. Can you tell us, Alanna, how did this end up in your mythology, and what do you know about this curse, and how did it work for you?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So it's funny. I think I always, and I think this manifests in the book, I always sort of took it about as seriously as astrology, which is sort of oh yeah, this maps onto certain experiences for sure, but also it's a little chicken or egg. It's am I just finding facts that I can retrofit to this thing I've heard about? But yeah, my understanding was always sort of the hush hush lore that if you're dating someone and you're not married to them, then if you make them a garment that's really intricate like a sweater, you'll break up before you give it to them. And obviously there's so many problems with that. First of all, the myth itself is just deeply heteronormative and very much if you're not married, it's very why buy the cow and you can get the milk for free, in a way that I'm not super down with. But I do think that where it bears out, and I wrote about this a little bit in the book, is if you're burdening a relationship with all these expectations, if you're sort of like, well, this is the person who's going to save me, who's going to make me the best version of myself, I need to be with them or else, which is like, certainly as, you know, an anxious and sometimes like overly dependent person, I think my brain could definitely go there. And then in that way, it's like, if I'm making a sweater such that they will love me forever and like know how great I am, then like, yeah, you're probably going to break up, you know? So it's like, it's almost more like, rather than being a curse, it's more like the canary in a coal mine, I've thought of it as, where it's like, if you're doing it for the wrong reasons or with the wrong expectations, that'll sort of illuminate like the hairline cracks that are already there, as opposed to like being the thing that causes the cracks, if that makes sense.
I think at some point in our lives, a lot of my friends had been married for a long time. They're like, oh, I think we're going to break up. Let's have a kid and that'll keep us from breaking up. And then they
Exactly.
break up.
No, totally. And like, honestly, it's funny because like I've been with my current partner now for years, and like, you know, we're in it for the long haul. It's like not really a question anymore. And I've actually still never made him a sweater. And he's a sweater wearer, I suppose, like, you know, the sort of Banana Republic type sweaters. But more than anything, it's like, I don't know, he just gets more use out of like socks and hats. So it's just sort of more a utilitarian thing than anything else. Like, I'm sure he'd appreciate it if I made him a sweater, and like maybe at some point we'll like cross that bridge, but it almost just like hasn't really come up. And it's more like, okay, like, here, baby, you're like out of nice warm socks and it's been snowing a lot. Like, here, I'm gonna make you some. So I would say that's more our take on things now.
You know, it's funny too, because you were kind of tying in, like in your book, you talked about sock knitting. Mm-hmm. And socks are kind of almost more of an act of love because they're harder, you know, to it. And it's just like, it's not as out there and obvious. Like, people aren't going to see your boyfriend in the sweater or your partner in the sweater, and you get to be like, I made that, you know. It's just
right, like I'm claiming this person or this yeah, totally.
But it is like this little act of love that they're kind of wearing, and very utilitarian. And it's funny because right before we talked to you, we talked to Kate Atherley, who's from Witty, you know, like the sock
huge
queen.
fan.
Yes. She's wonderful.
She gets a shout out in the book too.
Yeah, she's pretty great. And she was talking about sock knitting, and between like right after we talked to her, I read your book, and then I'm like, fine. And I just started making socks again, which I'm just not a sock knitter, but in between doing all the sweaters that we're doing for this book, I just need something like not a sweater.
Totally. No, I so get it. And like, I always like to have projects of like sort of a couple different registers going on. Like, if I'm doing a really complicated, like lacy top, I want something that's just like really simple stockinette that I can do while I'm just like watching TV, or like, you know, in the before times when I used to take the subway, like, you know, I sort of want to be able to switch between those things depending on like what my brain craves at the time. So like right now I'm working on, I cast on for your hat, so I'm excited to do that. But I'm also just working on this like incredibly simple garter stitch scarf that's like a knockoff Hudson Bay blanket. You know, it's like cream colored with like a red stripe and a green stripe and a blue stripe. And it's just like actually the most mindless project I've made in years. And it's so soothing. It feels like just fully meditative to just like not even have to think about this thing.
I keep telling everybody this. I said the Icelandic Lopapeja sweaters, except for the yoke, they're mindless knitting.
Yeah, because it's just stockinette through the body, right?
Yeah, like you just knit in a circle, and once you get the yoke on, like you attach the sleeves at the same time, it's like you get to turn your brain off, except for, you know, the color work.
Right, exactly, which you have to look at the whole time.
So let me drop some knitting knowledge here. Since I have some, and I'm very excited to have some, since I only learned how to do this, we started in August, I think. That in The Curse of the Boyfriend Sweater, one of the chapters is about top-down knitting, which I didn't know anything about until I read that, and why it's different and possibly better. And I'd never considered that anything could or would be knitted from the top down. But that does seem like an interesting way to make a Lopi sweater, because if you're going to screw it up, you do that first, and then you
exactly,
rather than knitting mindlessly for days and weeks and then saying, oh, this is destroyed.
The hard parts at the end, yeah. Although it does make sleeves annoying. I think you have more control over the sleeves from the bottom. I guess it depends. It totally depends on your pattern. But like, I have often, I would say, sacrificed good fit for fun knitting. like that is definitely my MO. I'm like way more of a process than a product knitter. And like I always want to make just like top down raglans, which like sometimes look like I'm just like wearing a sack, but they're really fun to knit and they're really intuitive. So, you know.
I will have to say, like, certain parts of your book gave me anxiety as a knitter when you're like, I
Oh
don't
no.
and I'm like,
I never want to give anyone anxiety. My curse.
No, but I mean, it was just funny because I'd be reading that and I'm like, how are you not doing a pattern and how are you not doing this? And then I got to the part where you're like, if I don't like it, I just rip it out. I'm like, okay, that's an option.
Yeah, no, it's funny because I think I am actually a very like rigid and measured person in so many aspects of my life, and I'm really not in my crafting life. Like obviously when I was writing, especially the second book, the Knit a Hat, like that was something that I really had to be quite technically sure on and had to be very experimental. But like really often in my knitting, I don't do gauge swatches. Like, I'm mostly making stuff that's for me so I can just like try it on as I go. It's like, I don't know, it's funny. It's almost like where I get to like fuck up and like mess around a little bit in ways that I don't let myself do, in my like social or professional lives very much. It's like a fun little proving ground or something.
No, that
dilettante knitter.
And it was, can you tell us a little bit too about like the process of writing that book, because it was so personal in a lot of ways. Like, was that kind of scary to put out?
Oh my God, you guys. So I guess I'll start at the beginning where, so the sort of seeds of the book were planted because I was a staff writer at BuzzFeed at the time. And I was I was working for the DIY section, which was sort of like actually a catch-all name for like the visually appealing section. We would also like write about like architecture and books and stuff in addition, and like home design in addition to, like stuff you're making by hand. But anyway, so as part of that, I wrote two, I think, personal essays about knitting a couple years apart. The first was actually, I think, the first essay in the book, which was about losing two friends who were quite young when I was quite young, and sort of using knitting to figure out how to navigate that sense of grief and really kind of look ahead to a future where there was new life. And so I'd written that piece and was just like really, really pleased with it. Not just like, I don't know, traffic is one thing, but it was just really cool to be like, oh, there are all these knitters out here on the internet who are reading this and responding to it and like sending me, emails and comments and whatever. And they really seem to like get it. And, like, I write about all kinds of things, and I certainly used to write more, and you get like all sorts of trolly remarks and just like, you just open yourself up to like such abuse. And I like really did not encounter that with this. It was like, oh, there's an appetite for this. There's a hunger for this. So I wrote that, and then I ended up writing a second piece about anxiety and panic attacks basically, and how knitting has helped me through that. And then I was kind of like, okay, I've written these two pieces, and unlike when I would write pieces about other topics, like, you kind of hit the bottom of the barrel and you're like, okay, cool, like I covered that thing, I'm done. And instead I was just like, oh my God, there's so much I didn't fit into these, two explorations, which are similar. Grief and anxiety are not, they're cousins, certainly. And I was just like, you know what? I think I could use this as a frame to talk about a lot of different stuff, including like joy and boredom and other like less dire emotions, basically. And so I was like, okay, how does one write a book even? And I was really, really lucky and privileged at the time to be working at a place where lots of other people had written and published books. Like I was really lucky to be able to like tap a fellow editor on the shoulder and be like, hey, so like you've written a book, like how does that happen? How do you find an agent? Whatever. And so I like ended up, writing what I thought was like a book proposal, which like super turned out not to be, and like shopping it around to different agents. And like really my agent love story just like felt like a rom-com, because my agent is this woman who I'd actually known for years. And I just reached out to her for like advice, basically, because I was like, hey, Kate, like I know you're a literary agent, but also I think you're a crafter. Like, could you just like advise me on who to talk to about this? And she was like, whoa, I want to read your pages. Let's figure this out. And so that was really great to have someone who understood sort of both the crafty side of it, but also the literary, for want of a much better word, side. Because like, as you were saying, Kyle, like, it isn't real. It like is a book about knitting, but from the beginning, we really wanted to position it as a book that like, people who were not crafters, but who had dealt with this kind of thing, in terms of anxiety or grief, could relate to and could sort of see it as like, oh, this is just a frame to look at these things through. So that definitely like narrowed the pool somewhat in terms of who we were pitching it out to, but also made it exciting to be like, okay, this is kind of a fun, weird format. And so we shopped it around. It ended up selling. And then I spent the next like year or two just like writing the rest of the essays. And I was so freaked out right before it came out. Like, because like you guys obviously know this, but like there's this weird lag time between when you have turned in the final and like can't change anything unless it's like a real problem, and
Right.
when it is released to the world. And like, right, as like a person who deals with anxiety, that wasn't like my finest hour. Like I spent those probably like 6 months like freaking out and being like, you know, did I say too much? Did I come off a certain way? Did I somehow violate anyone's privacy who wouldn't want it to be thus? And like, you know, then of course it came out and everyone was like, Alanna, it's fine. Like no one cares about you as much as you care about you, which I think is a good lesson in general. But that was wild. And it was really cool to kind of like get to see the process from point A to point B. Cause like, you know, I'm a writer and editor by trade, but I work online mostly and sometimes for print. And just like, the metabolism is so different. It's so fast versus a book, which is, you know, moves like a glacier. And like in some ways that can be frustrating, but in some ways it was so fun to get to swim around in, and just like really kind of gave me the bug in that way.
It's funny you mention how important your editor was, because our agent mentioned at some point, he said, "Oh, you know, I've put aside some of the money from this so that you guys can get me a Lopi sweater when you're in Iceland." And I was like, I'm gonna make my first Lopi sweater for Gordon.
Hell yeah.
I haven't done that yet, but like, does this jinx our relationship? You know?
Nah.
But yeah,
seems like it's coming from the right place. That's all that the sweater requires.
You know, it's been so critical to the success of this, and you know, making it happen. And I think that a lot of times when people are thinking I want to write a book or whatever, they're not really thinking about the people who spend, you know, their entire waking life like going to bat for you.
Right. And the team that helps shape it and helps kind of get you out of your own head.
Right.
And like, yeah, and my editor, Amy, was wonderful and just really, and she was not, so my editor is not a crafter at all. She like, I don't think has ever knitted or anything. And that was kind of cool to have an agent who was a knitter and really understood sort of the crafty side of this, and an editor who was like, I am not a crafter, but I understand how important this is to you. So I could sort of like bounce between those two poles a little bit, where it's like, okay, if I can create something that appeals to both of these people, and in addition to like, you know, my friends and family and like co-reader and coworkers and, you know, fellow readers and stuff, like I will have accomplished something, which is like, it's a weird task to set yourself. But I was also like, this is the kind of book I want to read. Like that was probably the thing that was the main source of confidence, I guess, when I was really starting out to and trying to be serious and sell it. I was like, you know what, like I would be stoked to read a book like this, and not to say that this was the first book like this at all. Like this is a long line of tradition, you know, of people sort of writing about their feelings through the lens of crafting. But you know, I was like, I think that there's room here for my version of this story, and I think I'd be stoked to read it. So like, you know, may as well go for it.
I mean, I think there's always room for that because everybody's different. Like
right,
every single person approaches their life and craft and everything in a different way. So I feel like there's room for all the stories.
Right, exactly.
And it kind of fills the void of like, I was saying the other day how much I missed logging on to see if my favorite blogger had written something, like my favorite knitting blogs. Like I missed those so much. And so that kind of felt like it was filling that little void, you know, where you miss going on and reading a blog that would be a little bit personal and maybe tie into a little bit about knitting and hey, here's a pattern.
Right.
Like I missed that.
Right. And get that glimpse into someone's sort of brain and that intimacy. Right. Because you can't get that on like, and again, like I have worked in digital media my entire career, and I've sort of like, I was there for the you know, fall of the blog as like a, you know, a thing that was really viable. And we've been talking about like, okay, what does it look like now? Like a lot of people are shifting to newsletters, and is that the same? But then I don't know, it's tough. There's a lot more of like an opt-in to that, and like having someone in your inbox is actually pretty different than, as you say, like seeking out the blog and being like, I'm going to catch up on, you know, 4 months of entries because I haven't looked at it in a while. It's just, yeah, it's a different value proposition.
Yeah, it's definitely something that if anything makes a comeback on the internet, I hope it's that.
Yeah, exactly.
Kyle missed all that stuff. I mean, as far as the crafting side of it goes.
Right, because you were saying, Kyle, you just learned how to knit.
Yeah, so our book sold in 20 2019 or 2020, I guess. And they'd announced it right before COVID, and we were supposed to go in, I don't know, April, I guess.
It was, our flight was like 2 days after they said no more flying.
Oh my God, yeah.
So we had this book that was announced that they needed, you know, something for, and we had nothing for it. And so, you know, somewhere along the food chain, they said, well, what if Kyle learns how to knit over the next, you know, however many months, and then actually knits a sweater while he's in Iceland? And
Yeah,
I was
because we're
like,
gonna be there for a couple weeks, like driving around in a van, like
Right,
around the
right.
road.
I was gonna say that seems like the move when you go to Iceland.
Yeah, so Kyle's gonna knit a Lopi like while we're there.
Word. Do you guys have like renewed plans to go, or are you waiting until everything lifts?
Yeah. We haven't booked another flight yet, but
Yeah.
Our plan is once we're both fully vaccinated.
That makes sense.
Because we don't want to go and be in quarantine for 5 days, because you know,
Right.
It's kind of hard to like take off for 2 weeks as it is.
No, I mean, I have friends. So a coworker of mine is from Korea, and he went back to Korea and had to do the full 2-week isolation. And so he ended up working remotely, East Coast hours from Korea, from like, 3 a.m. to 10 a.m. or whatever, and then ended up like taking off the actual time to see his family. But it's like really, really wild what lengths you have to go through. Yeah. And also cases are really, really super low in South Korea, because I think they have such a strong quarantine program.
Yeah, and then it's just like, you don't want to get on the plane for 6 hours or go through an airport. So we're just gonna play it safe, and luckily our editor's been really good about being understanding each time we're because at first we're like, well, let's just give us a couple extra months. Surely this will be over by then.
Were we ever so young?
And then we're getting ready to ask for another extension, I think, because we're supposed to go now, and I'm like, I just want to be vaccinated by this point. We're so close.
Yeah. That's how I feel. I feel like we're all, a few months out from, certainly not like back to normal, quote unquote, but at least from being able to have a little more freedom of movement.
Yeah, feeling safe on a plane. Like, I'd feel safe in Iceland because they've been very good about
right. No, I think the plane makes sense. And like, you don't want to get anyone else sick. Like that's kind of been my main like thing is, like I just don't want to feel responsible for anyone else's misfortune. So I'm just staying put.
Yeah, there's a lot we can do in the meantime. Like we can meet all these Icelanders who are going to hook up with while we're there.
Yeah.
We can plan our chapters. We can get a lot of writing done.
Yeah.
That's kind of what we've been doing. We basically just need to go take the pictures at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Finish a couple extra tech edits, but other than that, just go take the photos, have our adventures, write about those, and then kind of drop them into the book. But it's such a beautiful place, and it's like so hard to not have it done.
Right. And to be this close to the finish line and just like, it's like looking through a window at something.
But I kind of love this because when Kyle first went, he was not a knitter. And so we're in the yarn stores and I'm like, look at this. And he's like, it's yarn.
Sheep. Yeah.
And now I think he's going to have like a little bit more of a reaction when we go back to some of these things. Right. Maybe appreciate it in a different way as a crafter versus a non-crafter.
Well, it's certainly improved my knitting photography now, because I'm not a knitter. I'm just a photographer. I photographed Joan's last book, which was about geek celebrities, modeling knitting stuff. So I was like, hey man, I'm at George R. R. Martin's house. So like that held my attention, and I didn't really care so much about the knitting stuff. I was like, whatever. What's in that box? What comes next? It's like, give me that Star Trek thing. But now, because I'm super proud of everything I've knitted, all these it's like scarves with giant holes in them that are like wider on one side than the other and everything. And I'm like, I have to photograph this in the way that really shows off its, unintentional
stitch pattern. And yeah, exactly.
So I know a lot more now what I'm looking for when I'm looking at a picture of something, that goes with the pattern. So it's certainly made me a better photographer for this.
No, that's great. I actually like the thing you're saying too about just feeling so proud of being able to do something like that has felt stronger than ever to me in quarantine. And I have to say, like, I would say the first 6-7 months of quarantine, I just like was not knitting at all. Like people kind of kept joking with me and being like, oh, like probably you're getting a lot of knitting in. And I was like, I'm not getting a lot of anything in. Like I just felt so uncreative, so just like unproductive, just like really unable to like put anything back out into the world. But it's been really nice in these last few months, like to just sort of be like, oh, right, like the cause and effect here are so one-to-one in a way that like nothing else in the world is. Like I can't really affect anything that's going on like immediately outside my own like brain or body. But with knitting, it's like, oh, I can just like take my sticks and my string and like do the thing. And that has just felt really like important and liberating in a way that I'd like never totally appreciated before this time. So I feel like you picked like the right time to get into it for sure.
Well, certainly, like one of the ways that I've been reacting to this whole thing is that I need to be doing something all the time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and we were talking about that point at which your book has been handed in, but it hasn't come out yet, you know, and my reaction to that is always like, I got to start a new book.
Right,
you know,
right.
I cannot sit here for 6 months and, you know, keep checking Amazon to see if pre-orders have started.
Right, exactly.
You know, and after, and you know, when you hand your book in, like nobody, your publisher will take your calls anymore. You're like, hey, how you doing? They're like,
cool, don't worry, it's fine.
So it's just been nonstop, me like constantly trying to like, what can I do now? You know, can I do this? Can I do that? And so the knitting's been very helpful for that. It's like, I'm going to start a hat. I'm going to start a scarf. I'm going to make you something.
Right. Or else.
Which has, you know, it's filled those times where otherwise I would just be incredibly anxious.
Totally. Yeah. And it's even just nice to like have something to devote your like physical energy to. Like I am such a fusser, and like I would even like I would often like knit during meetings at work, and like I am, you know, now sort of getting back into it over Zoom. And I actually think it helps me focus more on like the conversation, which might seem paradoxical, but I've talked to a lot of crafters for whom that's the case, where like otherwise I think I'd be like, you know, kind of like surreptitiously scrolling through my laptop or like picking at my hair or my nails, or just like, I don't know, I just like need to kind of direct it somewhere. So it's really nice to just like have something that's halfway productive to do that.
I want every teacher to like listen right now. If your kids are knitting in school,
oh my God,
it's okay. It's helping them.
Yes, I had a 5th grade teacher who was wonderful. He was just like, you know, when you have like one of your first favorite teachers who you just really vibe with. Mine was Mr. Marino, and he was just like so cool about me knitting during school in a way that like other teachers, to their credit, I didn't have anyone who was like actively like, Alanna, but like he really was like, no, this is rad. Like your other classmates should be like doodling or whatever too, like kind of using me as like an example of like, no, it's okay. Like whatever, you're not disturbing anyone.
It helps you focus. It really does.
It really does.
My grandmother used to work in a school, and she taught the problem kids how to knit, and it actually like they saw an improvement. And
I love that.
like knit in class.
I noticed.
So, yeah, that's great.
I noticed too that it's been great for like TV shows that my wife is interested in and I am absolutely not.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, now I want to watch all of those. You know, put that thing on that I'm totally not interested in, because then I can sit here and like do this and not be like looking up.
I do it with audiobooks a lot too.
Oh yeah.
Like I love listening to audiobooks, but like I can't just like sit in my house and listen to audiobooks. And even like, you know, I live in a small Brooklyn apartment. You run out of chores eventually to do while you're listening. And you certainly run out of like the same 8 city blocks to walk around. So it's been nice to sort of be like, okay, I can pair these two things.
Yeah. I got your audiobook also.
That was fun, I will say, because I got to record it myself, which I hadn't expected. And I loved doing it. Like that was actually probably my, like one of my favorite parts of the whole process. Cause like, right, because so many crafters and people who work with their hands that I know listen to audiobooks, I was like, oh, this is kind of a natural fit that I can like almost be talking to them at the same time as, you know, they're working on their projects or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It was weird though, because like being in the booth, like talk about, you know, I was recording it like a month before the actual book came out, like talk about it was, you could no longer make changes. And I would like come across certain sentences and be like, that's a really awkward way to say that. I am going to say it differently for the recording.
Well, I noticed you said like AIM screen name, and I was like, we always call that AIM.
AIM, yeah, exactly. No, and I got to record at this, I wish I could remember what it was called, but it's like kind of a dope recording studio in Manhattan, in like near Times Square, where like the recording engineer was this like kind of grizzled older guy who had like worked with all these like, you know, rock bands and stuff. And I was like, oh wow, like, and now you're recording me like writing about like, you know, Knit one, purl two. Thank you, sir. He was
How
great.
long were you in there recording it?
It was only a couple days. I mean, the book is not long, so it was probably like 2 or 3 work days total. But my voice was tired by the end, like in a way that I did not expect. I was like, oh, I don't know, like 6 hours of talking is not that much. Then it's like, no, it's actually so much talking.
Yeah, one of the
And
people,
a lot of it, I felt like a diva. I was like, oh yes, like sorry, I need to break for like a lozenge and some tea. And it's like it's not my vibe, but
one of the people who was in Geek Knits was Joel Hodgson from Mystery Science Theater 3000.
yeah.
And I got to go to a recording studio with him while he was voicing a cartoon character.
Oh, that's sick.
And I got to actually like go in the booth with him while he was doing it and take pictures in between takes. So that was super fun.
That's so cool.
And it's super interesting to me to like see how the sausage is made.
Yes.
You know,
I have a friend who's like a professional voiceover artist. Like she was an actor in college and now she just like has a recording studio in her house. And like, you know, sometimes she'll just be like on the Pokemon show or whatever. And it's just like, oh, right. Like people have to do that. That's like someone's job.
my wife does audiobooks.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah. And so she has a studio in like my coat closet.
I mean, you guys are getting the like nice sunny. This is usually where my partner sits because he works in podcasting, so he like, you know, has to be in front of a screen most of the time. But like if I did not have access to this room right now, you would be seeing me sitting in my bedroom closet right now.
So sometimes I'll go to get a coat, you know, or a jacket or something, and there'll be like pages of a book pinned to it. So it's like, oh, I guess I probably shouldn't take anything out of this closet. I'm just going to be cold.
That's really funny.
Well, thank you so much, Alanna, for talking to us today about your wonderful book. I hope everybody gets a chance to check it out. It's nice. You can read it in like little snippets, you know, because it is done in essay form. But it was really great talking with you and knitting with you. So thank you so much for taking the time out of your day. We really appreciate it. And we'll, of course, drop your Twitter links and anything else that you want right below.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for having me.
Thank you.